Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Next Economy Now. My name is Jeanette Moreland, and I'm the marketing lead at Lift Economy. I am joined today by the wonderful Christine Platt. Since 2005, Christine has dedicated her career to working at the intersections of social justice and environmental sustainability. Former senior policy advisor for the U.S. Department of Energy, she holds a BA in Africana Studies from the University of South Florida, an MA in African and African American Studies from The Ohio State University, and a JD from Stetson University College of Law. Welcome, Christine. So excited to have you on the show.
Hi, so excited to be here.
All right. Well, I would love to just dive right in with the most broad question ever. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your life story and how you got into the work that you're doing today.
You know what? It's so funny. I've had so many life stories. And so I love to encourage people. Your life does not have to take this one singular journey. And so as you can tell from my bio, like I've had a career in academia, I've had a career in law. I've just had so many opportunities to work at the intersections of all these little sectors that I love, right? Which is rooted in racial, social, and environmental justice, right? So I've, again, worked in academia, I've worked for the government, I've worked for small firms, I've worked for large firms. But at the core of all that work, I would always just have this feeling of not being completely content. And the way I described it recently, working on another book, the way I described it recently in this book is, I had a feeling that there were parts of my life that were satisfying or gratifying, but I didn't really feel satisfied. Does that make sense? Or I had parts of the work that felt really, really good, but because they were parts, I didn't feel whole. And I'm like, what is missing in my life? I had a friend in 2013. So funny. She's actually also a writer now and working at the LA Times and doing amazing work on PBS and just like all this fun stuff. But back in 2013, we were both just like, I love stories. Me too. I used to always want to write stories. Me too. And she was like, we should do National Novel Writing Month. And I was like, what is that? Sounds super nerdy. Count me in. What do I do? And National Novel Writing Month is held every November. And essentially, you write the first draft of a novel in a month. You write 50,000 words in 1 month. I know, crazy. But something was missing and it sounded so fun. And so that is how my journey to being an author really started, was in 2013. I decided to write this book based on this theory that I had heard in grad school, that the spirits of slaves are not at rest and that they're embodied in the winds of hurricanes. And that theory came about because a lot of hurricane winds start off the coast of West Africa, gain momentum as they cross the Atlantic, and hit mostly the southern slave-holding states. And I was like, I'm going to write a novel about that. No novel writing experience. As much creativity as possible had been sucked from me, because that is part of being a lawyer. Like, you just have to stick with the facts, right? You don't have time to embellish and add other possibilities to the story. But it just felt so right. And I decided to look at the top 10 hurricanes to see if there are any corresponding moments in Black history that would justify the rage of a hurricane. I couldn't use any stories that we'd heard before. And that month, November 2013, was the wildest month of my adult life. I mean, I was working full time and I would come home and I would be in my little office in the basement, just like writing for hours and researching and checking in with other writers across the world. And it was so fun. And I felt fulfilled, right? Like, there were parts of my life before that felt fulfilling, but I didn't feel fulfilled. And that was that missing link. I ended up indie publishing that book, and it went bananas. And it's so funny. It's one of those things where the first few reviews you get, it's like, it's your friends, it's your family. And so they were like, it's really good. And I'm like, for real? Are you lying to me? You know, that kind of thing. So it wasn't until I started hearing from like strangers and professors, and we're using your book in our FM class, we're using your book in our, and I was just like, this is so crazy. And then I got an agent and the rest is history. And now I'm like dozens of books in, currently under deadline for another. And it's just been this beautiful journey. Like I have no regrets about any of it. When I wanted to be in law, I really wanted to be in law, and I learned a lot and I took a lot, and like all of those little parts have contributed to this wholeness that I feel. So I can't like be dismissive of them, right? But I do remember at the time just being like, this cannot be all there is. And so that's how I found my way, and now here I am.
I don't know why this introduction was already all the things that I needed to hear today about showing up as yourself. Yeah, and there's this theme of integration that I'm hoping I can reweave and maybe get some more details on this forthcoming book. But I guess for now and selfishly, yeah, my path to you was around the book that you published just 2 years ago, The Afrominimalist Guide to Living with Less. I remember reading a copy, I think it was maybe a year ago, and just feeling a lot of resonance and connection. And obviously you've built this really wonderful community around one of these parts in your life that again has touched so many other parts. So I'd love to chat about that for a little.
Yeah, and minimalism came about too. My journey to living with less came about also during that time, right? When I got an agent and it became less of National Novel Writing Month and more of a job. I have like contracts and deadlines. I ended up quitting my job and I was working in the government at the time. I was actually working as that senior policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Energy. You know, it was my first time being at home probably since I was a child. Like I had worked my entire life. I remember just like, first of all, creativity does not conform. So I was like, as soon as I quit my job, I am going to write 1,000,000 books because I can write from 9 to 5. And 9 o'clock would come and my brain would be like, girl, we got none for you. Good luck. And so I found myself a lot just like looking around the house, being around the house, puttering around the house. And I was just like, there is so much stuff. Like I'd never sat with my stuff because I was out of the house most of the day, right? And then you come home in the evening, it's the evening routine, and like you're just not home with the stuff. And then if I was home with the stuff on the weekends and I saw too much stuff, I'd be like, oh, let me go get a basket. I'm going to buy more stuff to hide the stuff. And so this was the first time that I really was just sitting down with my stuff, and every day, just this feeling of overwhelm. I had so many clothes. I had so many home goods and knickknacks and just stuff. And I remember just like, how am I going to get rid of all of this? And I go to Google, and at the time, the minimalists, Josh and Ryan, they were really the only ones who were talking about this, or really had a known platform, I should say. I'm sure other people were talking about it, but they have been at the core of the minimalist movement for a really long time. And I remember coming across their blog and just like reading, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a minimalist then. This is what this, and I'm going to be happy too, you know. And I'm like looking on Pinterest and looking at all these clean, barren, serene spaces. And I was like, I must have this life. And it was the hardest. It was just unbelievably a daunting process. And I didn't really have a guide, and I didn't have the language and the tools and the wherewithal to really know what was happening. I just know I wanted to get rid of some of the stuff. But I think there is a method to the madness, or we can create methods to the madness. I remember coming across Marie Kondo's book a few years later, and I was like, okay, I'm going to KonMari. Like, you know, I just took like bits and pieces from Courtney Carver and Joshua Becker, and you're just like, okay, this works, this doesn't work. And I remember when I finally moved back into the space that I'm in now, which is 630 square feet. It was a condo in DC that I'd been renting out. I just remember thinking there is no way I can live in a space this small. And now that my daughter's in college, I'm like, it's so much space. I just need a tiny house. Anyway, at the time, I did end up being able to start with this blank, barren canvas and try to incorporate a lot of what I saw on Pinterest. And I just remember thinking, this is the most depressing, sterile, institutional feeling place ever. And I cannot live like this. And so I started this account called the Afrominimalist on Instagram. And I just started it like, if there's anyone else out there looking to live with color and patterns and textures, but still want to be a minimalist, here I am. And it ended up just being this beautiful community that doesn't just encompass minimalists, it's tiny home dwellers, it's van lifers, it's sustainability experts, it's homesteaders, right? Like, and everyone is just like sharing all of these tips and guidance and advice on how to just have enough. You know what I mean? Like, when can we just learn to be content with enough? And I think what happened was there was no one really out there talking about it in this way. No one really had challenged mainstream minimalism, showing a different alternative. People challenge minimalism all the time. It is seen as elitist. It is seen as very white, literally and figuratively. And so people had challenged it, but no one had ever really shown an alternative that was open and accessible to everyone. And so it started to just, the platform just like grew and grew and grew. And the pandemic was upon us. And my agent at the time, she said, this could be a good time to write that Afro-minimalist book. I said, what Afro-minimalist book? We have not talked about Afro-minimalist book. And she was like, you don't think you should write an Afro-minimalist book? And I was like, no, Emily, I do not. She said, I think you should. She's like, so many people are going to be home with their stuff and they're feeling the same way that you're feeling. And it was a good time. It was about 5 years out, so I could look back on it with still close enough to remember the hard times, but also being able to see what was on the other side and share lessons learned. And so, yeah, I pitched this book, The Afro Minimalist Guide to Living with Less. Literally wrote it, literally wrote the pitch, the book, and it was launched all in less than a year. It was bananas. Yeah, that was when we didn't really know what we were in for with COVID-19. You know what I mean? So it's just, I was already in it when I was like, oh, wait, we're going to be in this space for a while. So the book came out and it did exactly what it was supposed to do, which is really introduce people to not really necessarily the concept of minimalism, but just the concept of living with less. Because there's something about that word minimalism that is just like very jarring for people, because it does evoke those images that I talked about earlier, which when you're sitting in a cluttered house, it feels very much like, oh, if I could just live in this photo, right? But it's, for a lot of people, it's not very practical. And so wanted people first, before they even picked up a garbage bag, getting them to understand the psychology of ownership, right? Had I started with that in my journey, I would have had a much better understanding of my attachments to things and my motivations to buying things, right? But I had to go through like this horrible, vicious cycle of trying to figure it out that we don't want anyone else to have to go through. So I'm like, let me give folks some tips here, right? And we all have our unique psychologies of ownership, getting people to understand the power of touch, all of these different things before we even pick up a bag and a donation bag and say we're going to start donating, right? You know, it's a 4-step process. Step 1, acknowledging that you have more than you need. And that's more than like how I just glanced around the room that time. That was like really taking an inventory, right? It was one thing to say like, oh, I have a lot of jeans. It was another thing to count them. Be like, oh, I have 52 pairs of jeans. But surprisingly, I just keep wearing these same 2. Acknowledgement was a big part of it. And I think so many people start there. And the step 2, though, is what really I think has been the biggest sort of gift that I've given myself and others in the journey, which is this gift of forgiveness, right? Forgiving ourselves, forgiving other people who we feel are responsible knowingly or unknowingly, right? So often it dates back to our childhood, cultural expectations, societal expectations, right? And those can evoke a lot of feelings sometimes that aren't necessarily so healthy or positive to linger in. And so getting people to understand the power and the gift of forgiveness and how only by forgiving ourselves and others are we able to move forward in this process of letting go. And then step 4 was also a part that I felt it's like, where does this stuff go? And that was the sustainability person in me, right? And so step 3, getting people to like, what do you need, use, and love? Not what do you need and use or love, or, you know what I mean? Like it has to be all encompassing. And then once you figure that out, what do you do with all of those things? Right. And so step 4 is paying it forward, right? Not overburdening and causing more harm to some of these poor donation centers that were just overflowing with items during the pandemic when everyone was just like going through their house. And it's like the same way you don't want a broken toaster, someone else does not want a broken toaster. The same way you don't want the 1,000-piece puzzle set that's missing 2 pieces. No one else does. You know what I mean? Like getting people to be mindful of their donations, and then those things that can't be donated, that can't be needed, used, and loved by others, what's the best way to sort of pay it forward, right? Are there organizations within your community that you can look to donate? Habitat for Humanity, their Restore is amazing, right? And giving people like actual resources and tools, right? And ideas, turning that t-shirt collection into a patchwork blanket. You know what I mean? Like just fun stuff. And so, yeah, that was the Afro Minimalist Guide, and that is the Afro Minimalist Guide. And I am forever known as the Afro Minimalist. But I think what happened for me, it happened for a lot of people during the pandemic that had platforms that was just their thing. And it was like, I wouldn't talk about minimalism all the time on Afro Minimalist. I would talk about my writing. I would interview other folks to talk about how they live with less. But then it's like the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden, everyone was online all the time. And so I started to only become known as the Afro Minimalist. And that was where I had to reclaim my narrative and say, like, actually, I have a lot going on. As my friend likes to say, you contain multitudes, right? And so I've actually heard from a lot of, and I'm using air quotes with the word influencer, and you know what I mean? But it's like, I've heard from a lot of folks that found themselves during that time. It was like, whatever your platform was, that was what you became known for, and being able to sort of reclaim your narrative and say, like, this is the Afro Minimalist Guide to Living with Less is one of many books that I write. I love writing stories about the African diaspora and our unique experiences, past, present, and future. And there are pages in the Afro Minimalist Guide that speak specifically to BIPOC experiences, because that was and continues, I think, sadly, to be an experience and perspective that has left out a lot of just wellness and lifestyle work in general. And it was beautiful to hear from people from all walks of life that said, wow, you know, those pages were so powerful for me. Because I say in there, like, hey, even if you're not BIPOC, you should read these pages and know what's going on. And you should make some of these considerations. And so that book is really special. It's very special. I love that it continues to find readers and hearts and homes, and helps people declutter, helps parents declutter. You know, a lot of people like the intergenerational approach to it. And so, yeah, it's a special book. It's a very special to me.
Yeah, me as well. Thank you for sharing that journey and how it continues to come alive. I was wondering, as maybe just a follow-up or kind of a tap into something that you shared, but also as like a BIPOC individual, I felt like it was really important that you took the time to mention that this isn't necessarily an issue of willpower or collecting or organizing things, but these are ways that like systemic racism and oppression are like showing up for folks. And this is why we have things like conspicuous consumerism and barriers to financial education and all the ways that plays out. I'm wondering for folks who haven't read it and should, if you can maybe elaborate a little bit more about why this is multi-layered and not just a matter of not being good at finding a Pinterest board and following a couple steps. Why it's not as simple as maybe we would make it seem.
I know. And I mean, part of that journey was me also grappling with like, why is this so hard? Right? Like, girl, you do not use this. You do not wear this. You do not want this. Ooh, but I can't let it go. Right? Or coming to these places where I'm like, why do I have all of these handbags? They're designer. I don't even like the shape of, you know what I mean? Like, so getting people to understand what conspicuous consumption looks like and where it comes from, right? And I think one of the lines in the book that I think resonates so much with people is, at least BIPOC communities, is this understanding of our past and what our parents experienced and what our communities have experienced. They are intricately woven into the narratives that we have been told and the narratives that we tell ourselves, right? Understanding that a lot of adages that were really designed for our protection and were very applicable for our parents and our grandparents and certainly our great grandparents really aren't necessarily beneficial to us today. We kind of have to challenge some stuff. Not all of them, but some stuff we have to challenge, right? And one example that I give in the book is live for today because tomorrow isn't promised, right? And for a lot of BIPOC folks, especially folks who grew up in, or their parents and grandparents grew up in Jim Crow South, right? Like you really, tomorrow was not promised. You know what I mean? Depending on if you do come from a war-torn country or even grew up, maybe your parents were small children during the Great Depression, right? Like these are things that are woven into them, right? I have met folks who, depending on how their parents were raised, they are either extreme savers or extreme spenders, right? Understanding how scarcity and lack play into our choices, right? Like growing up with scarcity and having the opportunity to be the first person in your family to be able to actually have abundance or create abundance, there's a weighted pressure there, right? It comes internally, but also externally. Well, you're the first person to be a doctor. Why are you living in this apartment? You should have a big house. You're the first person to be da 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 da. You should have this car. I thought all lawyers da da da. You know what I mean? Like all of these stories and narratives that we kind of have to identify and dismantle for ourselves are a lot more heavier and weighted in BIPOC communities. We also don't come from spaces where letting go or throwing out something that is totally usable and functional is a way of life, even if you're not using it. It doesn't matter. You might need it one day, right? And so getting people to understand how our childhood expectations, cultural expectations, conspicuous consumption, even just the weighted pressure of living in a white supremacist culture, right? Depending on where you are living in, there are folks that are like, I am the only Black person in my community. I feel like I have to dress a certain way. I have to look a certain way. I have to act a certain way or else, right? Like those sort of experiences can contribute and definitely contribute to how you spend for a lot of folks. Again, you have to look at your unique psychology of ownership and say, why am I motivated to buy these things? You have to look at your psychology of ownership and say, why do I have such an attachment to these things, right? And sometimes that drill down, I mean, I've had people cry, you know what I mean? They'll say like, I don't even want a coffee table, but I just remember that was all that my parents talked about. They wanted to get this coffee table. They had to get this coffee table. Everyone in the neighborhood had and we just couldn't afford it. Sometimes it's so the minutia when you drill down and you're like, wait, that's why I have a coffee table. For folks that have siblings, I recommend having these conversations with siblings. I recommend having these conversations with folks you went to high school with and people who you grew up with. And you're like, oh, do you remember when? Because so much of it is tied to the narratives and stories that we were told, also what we told ourselves, what we experienced. One of the stories I share in the book, A dear friend of mine loves Jordans, has so many Jordans. I was just like, where, why, where is this coming from? Right? Like, this is crazy. You have a wall of sneakers that you don't necessarily wear. And you have said, like, I want to understand why these sneakers and why these particular sneakers, right? Like, yeah, I have over 100 pairs of sneakers, but let's say 80 of them are Jordans. What is it about these Jordans? And having him come back and say, like, I remember when the Jordans came out and I really wanted a pair, and my parents bought me a pair of knockoffs from Payless, and I got clowned at school. And I was like, you know what? When I grow up, I'm gonna buy as many Jordans as I want. We are really committed to the stories that we tell ourselves as children. That inner child in us is like, we gonna do it. Remember what we said? And so I think when we talk about BIPOC experiences, understanding that they are just so intricately intertwined with so many different narratives and so many different things. When we talk about intersections, like that's what we mean, right? It's so layered and complex. And so it isn't necessarily a one size fits all. It most certainly doesn't fit into the mainstream minimalism narrative. It just doesn't. It's just not who we are. And so getting folks to understand that has been, yeah, it's a big part of the book for me.
Yeah, big part of the book, big part of the community you've built. And again, so important because I think when it's stripped of that context and compassion, as you mentioned, folks are coming to this feeling overwhelmed, as you mentioned, and very isolated. And when we're just met with this aspiration and none of the compassion and forgiveness or like that work, A, it doesn't feel like folks are ready to take that path, but B, all the folks who dumped things off at Goodwill and didn't take the time to examine that relationship, I feel like it's much easier to perpetuate those cycles. So thank you for taking the time to investigate it.
Thank you. Well, this is why the stuff keeps coming back, right? Because people are like, I tried this before. And it's like, oh, you didn't get to the root cause of the consumption habits, right? You know, it's really cool is I've heard from a lot of professional organizers over the years and literally heard from one the other day. I mean, they like share this book with a lot of their clients, and that's really powerful for me, right? And again, I think sometimes, you know, we say things like, oh, BIPOC or other lived experiences, we forget also that that encompasses so much as well, right? I hear from a lot of Jewish homeowners and professional organizers that have their unique struggles. I hear from Black folks that have their unique struggles. I hear from first gen folks. Like it is, yeah, it's very complex and there is no one size fits all. And I love that people are finding a way to do minimalism and live with less their own way. And again, there's so much I didn't know when I started the journey. It's less about, I would say less about becoming a minimalist. I tell people all the time, like, just let go of that word, right? Like, the goal is not to become a minimalist. The goal is to become a more conscious consumer. The goal is to be able to live with only what you need, use, and love. The goal is to become more content with having enough, right? Like, there are all these sort of phrases that we can put in that don't carry this weighted responsibility of minimalism, which is like, but I can only have one fork, one knife, and one spoon. It's like, no. And so, yeah, it's more about living with intention. That's what it really is about.
Yeah. I'm not sure if this conversation has come up, and maybe it has, but something else that I was thinking about reading the book and revisiting it in preparation for this conversation is really kind of the endless cycle that we get stuck in with like the accumulation of things. And you mentioned this in the book and the time that's needed to get this thing. I know that you mentioned working in law and having this high profile career and like needing to purchase things to like justify that time. Obviously, there's a saying that came from the book that's very popular in the community around this idea of less is liberation. And I'm curious if you're applying that frame or framework to other areas of your life, maybe your time, maybe like relationships, like have folks kind of taken that or have you
You've been
even
like
taken that, expanded it
peeking.
out? Am I?
You've been peeking at my computer today. Yes. Less is Liberation is actually the next book in the Afrominimalist series.
No
Oh,
way.
I know, right? It is. It's literally the title. Because again, what I learned is it's so like we all start with our things, right? And then you realize how good it feels being intentional with what you have and what you wear. And you're like, well, how else can I apply this to every area of my life, right? And I have a quote that I use in the book, and I've shared it online a few times recently, so I don't I won't get in trouble from the publisher. But, I say that the true battleground for our liberation, this freedom that so many of us seek, the true battleground for our liberation is not with the things that we have, right, or what we do. It is really rooted in learning how to organize and prioritize ourselves, right? It's less with the stuff and more with us. The true battleground for our liberation is less about what we have and more about who we are. That's really what it is. And so, yes, I have applied those principles to other areas of my life. And that 4-step approach works just the same, right? Because a lot of it is acknowledging those beliefs, those habits, those behaviors that no longer serve us, right? Forgiving ourselves, right? For holding on to these beliefs that no longer serve us, for continuing to engage in these habits and relationships without reciprocity and like all of these things, right? And so, yeah, less is liberation, I feel like is a movement. I like to call it a movement. And I just want more people to really have, again, another roadmap and guide that sort of leads them to living the lives that they want and deserve. And in order for that to happen, you got to let go. There's some stuff you got to let go. There's people you have to let go. There are thoughts that you have to let go, right? And like, again, giving people just some actionable steps and tools and language to sort of make that journey a lot easier, right? It's not going to be easy. It's going to be easier, but it has led and continues to lead to a very liberating life for me. And I'm just so incredibly grateful to be able to share these lessons with folks.
Well, I cannot wait. I'm so happy that you're diving deeper and tapping into that. I guess I'm curious if, maybe between the Afrominimalist guide being out and moving to this, if there were any life experiences or conversations or just like folks that were inspiring you to kind of broaden that out or maybe dig deeper into this idea of living with less in all areas.
Yeah, no, it's just really my life experiences, right? I mean, I think I have such a beautiful village of folks to call friends and colleagues, and they inspire me every day, all the time. We have hard conversations, we have honest conversations, we push each other, we really challenge each other to become the best versions of ourselves. And I remember a time in my life where I was such a people pleaser and I was so trying to help everyone else but myself and having to get to the root cause of that and just really being grateful to have a community of people who support me, right? And in the same way that when we let go of clothing and stuff in our closet that no longer serves us, it makes space for what we really truly want to wear, right? And what we truly enjoy. I mean, it's the same way with our relationships, with our friendships, with those people that we're in community with, learning the power of no when it comes to my work, when it comes to anything that doesn't serve me, I used to, again, have such a scarcity mind. So I have to say yes to this opportunity. If I don't, another opportunity is never going to come along, right? And just like finding myself overwhelmed, or when the right opportunity did come along, the one that, oh my God, this is a dream. I don't even have space for it because I said yes to all this other little foolishness that I don't even want to do. Just sharing those stories, but more in an anecdotal kind of way. And again, offering folks just some guidance and tips. And I think too that this is also just a part of, again, that community, that minimalist community, that the tiny homesteaders, all these folks, right? Ultimately, what you end up doing is living with intention in every area of your life. So I like to say, like, minimalism is the gateway to living with intention, right? Like, if you could commit to that journey, it's just going to feel so good. You are naturally going to want to implement it into every area of your life. And so many of the practitioners in that space who I respect and have been doing this work for a long time, so many of them have also transitioned and shared this message that it really, it can't just be your things, right? Or you're not receiving the full benefits of what this lifestyle can offer. And so, yeah, I would say I'm no one in particular, but all. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And even some of the stories I get in my DMs from people who have no idea that I'm working on this next book. And they're just like, oh man, I went through everything and I was like, you know what? Next thing I'm doing, I'm tackling my calendar. Next thing I'm doing, I'm tackling, you know what I mean? And I'm just like, yes, this is what we do. And so, yeah, it's been beautiful. But I think it's a natural progression. And again, just grateful to be in community and in proximity to so many people who just value and love and support me and this work so much.
Right, right. Yeah, I think the fact that it is rooted in community, even as you were talking, I was just having this vision or thought of folks are really taking this seriously and moving to liberating their time and their calendars and their homes, like what our consumption culture would look like, what our time and relating with each other would look like. I am a frequent time optimist, and so like rushing from here and there. And like even as you're talking, I'm like, if I really sat with that and embraced that, like how the intention for what's left and how that would change things.
Yeah, and I think like that's a big part of it too. I don't want to share too much. I'm like totally my publisher's gonna be like, are you mad, woman?
I'm sorry.
No. Getting people to understand the value of their time. And I too was a big time optimist and just also had no real concept. And it was very much like, oh, it's only gonna take 5 minutes, 2 hours later. And that can work in reverse too, because again, those narratives and beliefs that we have, oh, I just can't go through all these emails. It's going to take all day. The things that push us from not doing what we need to do. And then we go through the emails and we're like, and that took 15 minutes, right? So sometimes it can work in reverse. But I had to really learn the value of time, the value of my time. I had to learn how to pause and just not answer in the moment, right? I was a yes person in the moment. And I had to get to a place where I said, let me check my calendar. Let me get back to you. Let me give you an answer a little closer to the date, right? Because again, that people pleaser in me, once I agreed to something, even if it no longer served me, it didn't matter how tired I was. It didn't matter if I didn't, I would just be like, I have to go. I said I was going to go. I sort of like minimize putting that type of pressure on myself, getting to a place where I'm just like, yeah, I'll let you know, or it's a tentative, or I'll see. And people, it's a boundary that you set for yourself. And people who love and care about you respect that boundary. Hey, I know how you are with your time. I know your schedule is in flux all the time. Just want to give you a heads up. Can you hold this date on your calendar? They get it, right? Like we're all, and I think that's the thing, like being able to extend each other some grace. We are all just trying to figure out this new semblance and balance of life. We used to have time in between meetings. And now it's like you would have like one Zoom end at 3 and then you're hopping on another one at 3:02 and I'm sorry I'm late, y'all. And I mean like we are shifting and adjusting very quickly in so many areas of our lives. And I think a lot of people are feeling overwhelmed. A lot of people are just trying to find balance and figure it all out. And so I'm learning to extend folks grace.
Mm-hmm. Well, I am so excited and cannot wait to read. And again, I'm grateful that you're talking about this. It's so needed. I guess outside of the new book that you're working on and some other projects, what are you working on, thinking about? What's bringing you joy recently?
What is bringing me joy? I mean, I just came back from spending 2 weeks in the Blue Ridge Mountains with my daughter. She was at Wintergreen Music Festival as a lead student, and it was just a magical experience. Just one of 20 something students, and just watching her live out her dream. And it was just beautiful. So she would be creating her music stuff during the day. I would be writing during the day. We would come together in the evenings. The sun is setting over these gorgeous mountains and we're doing puzzles together. It's just this beautiful mother-daughter time that we had not had together in a while because of the pandemic. And then she's like a COVID senior, high school senior, and a COVID college freshman. And we're trying, it was just like this nonstop. And it was so beautiful to be able to slow down together, still be able to be working on our creative endeavors, but just having this magical mother-daughter time together. It was really good. So I am still smiling off that. I just got back a few days ago and just excited about all the projects that I'm able to work on, new ideas that are blossoming and blooming. And yeah, just feeling very good and content and settled in my life and who I am and where I'm going. I'm grateful for that. I fought to get to this place and it feels good. It feels good to be here.
Yeah, makes me so happy to hear that. Before we wrap up, we'll obviously drop links in our show notes to ways to follow and engage with you online, but any ways that listeners can support your work or amplify work of other organizations or things that you're really passionate about right now, and anything else you want to share with folks before we wrap up?
Yes, I try and keep at least my online engagement to a minimum. So I'm like only on Instagram at I am Christine Platt. I am a board member for Baldwin for the Arts, which is Jacqueline Woodson's nonprofit organization that allows for writers of the global majority to have an opportunity to have these retreats like I just had in the mountains. You know what I mean? It is a very privileged opportunity to be able to take time and space away to write, not only to go, but to also have a space, to have your travel paid for, to have all of these things, have a chef prepare you healthy meals, right? And so that is what Baldwin for the Arts does. And we're gearing up for our next round of fellows. So anyone who wants to support that would love, love, love to have your support for Baldwin for the Arts. And I think, yeah, just any of my work that you find interesting, sharing it, buying it as a gift, checking it out at the library and telling other people about it. I feel like our stories have a way of finding the people who need them the most. And so that's why I write. Yeah, I'm grateful. Again, just really, really grateful.
Oh, amazing. Well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Christine, for all the work that you're doing. And I cannot wait to read this new book.
If I can finish writing it. Yes, no, I'm excited. It'll debut hopefully in the fall or winter of 2024. So right around the corner.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. Before you go, we wanted to let you know that our spring cohort of the Next Economy MBA begins on March 26th. If you're an entrepreneur seeking to create a business that works for all life, a member of a team looking to transition your organization into one that is more regenerative and democratic, or someone who's considering a career or livelihood transition and embodiment with your values, we designed this course for you. Over this 9-month learning journey, you'll have the chance to learn practical skills around business and life design based on our work with over 250 social enterprises. In addition to live sessions, you can deepen your experience and practice with special sessions, affinity groups, and connections with over 500 alumni who have participated in the course. Interested in learning more? Visit lifteconomy.com/MBA to view our course curriculum and sign up for a free intro with one of our facilitators. If you're ready to sign up, you can use the code PODCASTMBA to save 10% on tuition. We hope you'll join us.